So we're talking about whole numbers, rational numbers, and integers. So, first things first, what is a whole number? Right, okay, so not a decimal and positive. Right, and that's pretty much it. The way I like to think about it is it's a counting number, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's not a decimal, it's not a fraction. I like how you brought up that it's also positive. It can't be negative. And so it's a counting number. Good. Some examples of that, right? Like you said, 5, 6, 87, 500. Okay, cool. So we have whole numbers. What about integers? What's an integer? Okay, so they can be negative. Can integers be positive? Yeah, they can. They can be positive. And can integers be fractions? No, you're exactly right. They can't. So it's not a fraction. And if they can't be expressed as a fraction, can they be expressed as a decimal? No, they can't. So not a decimal. So what would be some examples of integers? Mm-hmm. 4, 8. Yeah, all these are exactly right. Cool. And both whole numbers and integers fall into the category of numbers we call rational numbers. Now, do you remember what a rational number is? Hmm? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a rational number can be a decimal, can be a fraction, it can be positive or negative, and the formal definition of a rational number is that it can be expressed as one whole number divided by another whole number. Another way to think of this is like A divided by B, where A is a whole number and B is a whole number. So, for example, like 1/2, right? 1 is a whole number, 2 is a whole number, so it's a rational number. An example of an irrational number would be something like, for example, 0.059878891, because there are no two numbers that, when we divide them, lead to this number. But we don't have to worry about that yet. Just wanting you to know that there are other types of numbers out there. Cool, so we have our 3 types of numbers. Good, and it seems like you understand these really, really well. So let me just do a few examples really quickly. So let's say negative 6.5. Is this a whole number? No. Is it an integer? And why is it not an integer? They do have to be positive or negative, but this is negative, so why is it not an integer? Yeah, exactly. An integer has to be a whole number. So it's not a whole number. Good. Is this a rational number? And why is it a rational number? Well, not necessarily. What was the definition that I just mentioned that makes a number rational? Hey, no worries at all. I'll send over a picture of this to you, and you can also rewatch this at any time. A rational number is a number that can be expressed as a whole number divided by another whole number. So, for example, negative 6.5, another way that we can write this number is negative 13 over 2. Is 13 a whole number? Is 2 a whole number? So, therefore, 6.5 is a rational number. Okay, good. How about negative 7? Is this a rational number? Why? And what divided, or 7 divided by what is equal to 7? So when we're saying 7 divided by 7, we're saying 7 divided up into 7 pieces is how many pieces? Let's think about it this way really quickly. Okay, not quite. Let's think about it this way. Let's say I have a pizza that has 4 slices. How can I express this one piece of the pizza? This right there, 4 pieces, they're all the same. How can I write this piece of a pizza as a fraction? Yeah, that's exactly right. Because there are 4 pieces, they're all the same, so this is one piece of the pizza. Okay, how about this half of the pizza right here? How can I write this as a fraction? This top part. 1/2. Now, if I want to write these 3 pieces right here, how would I write that as a fraction? Now, if I want to talk about the whole pizza, I have 4 pieces, how would I write that as a fraction? 1 over 1. Another way to write 1 over 1. Another way to write that is 4 over 4. Do you agree that 1 over 1 is equal to 4 over 4? Okay, good. So any number divided by itself is equal to 1. So negative 7 over 7, does that equal 7 or something else? Okay, so from this pizza example, we just proved that any number divided by itself is equal to 1. So let's just call this 7, actually. Let's say 7 over 7. It's a number divided by itself, so what is that equal to? Yeah, that's exactly right. How about 8 divided by 8? What does that equal? How about 7,000 divided by 7,000? What does that equal? That's exactly right. So we can write this number 7 as 7 divided by 1. So any number, any whole number, for example, like 13, you can write it as a fraction by just putting it over 1. Does that make sense? So how can I write the number 8 as a fraction? Mm-hmm. 8 divided by 1. How about the number 117? How can I write this as a fraction? Mm-hmm. And is 117 a whole number? And is 1 a whole number? So is this a rational number? Why? Yes, exactly right. Awesome. So does this sort of make sense? Good. And do you have any questions about either this putting a fraction over itself equaling 1, or a number divided by 1, or what makes an integer, whole number, or rational number? Okay, good. Okay, so now that we've talked about integers, rational numbers, and whole numbers, let's talk about absolute value. Have you guys gone over that in class yet? Okay, good. Well, let's go over it right now. So, the absolute value of a number, and if you don't have this written down, I recommend you write this down. This is going to be really important. I still use absolute value today, and I've been doing math for a long time. So it's something that you're going to need to know, and it's really important. So the absolute value of a number is the number's distance from 0. The absolute value of a number is the number's distance from 0. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Just let me know when you have that written down, and we can move on to explaining this a little bit more. Okay, good. So let's think of a number line. Have you seen number lines before? Okay, cool. So let's think of a number line that has, by the way, what are all these numbers right here? Are they integers, whole numbers, rational numbers? Yeah, that's exactly right. These are all integers because we're including negative numbers. So let's take the number 2, for example. How far away is 2 from 0? What is this distance? So the distance from 0 to 2 is 2. Therefore, the absolute value of 2 is 2. Now, the way we write the absolute value of a number is we write a line, the number, and then another line like this. Does that make sense? So if I wanted to write the absolute value of 3, I would write this. If I want to write the absolute value of 4, it'd be this. And the absolute value of 2 is the distance from 2 to 0, which is 2. So what's the absolute value of 3? What's the distance from 3 to 0? And why is it 3? Exactly. How about the absolute value of 4? Now, let's take a look at negative numbers. What's the absolute value of negative 2? That's exactly right. The absolute value of 2 is 2 because the distance from 2 to 0 is 2. How about the absolute value of negative 3? Exactly. How about the absolute value of negative 1,374. Exactly. So something that we can say for certain, what can we say about all these numbers? What's something that's the same about all of the absolute values, regardless of if the number is negative or positive? Okay, that's true, and that's a good observation. Another thing that we can say is that all of these numbers are positive. So the absolute value of any number is always positive. And the reason that it's positive is because we're talking about a distance from 0. We're not talking about the number itself, We're not talking about this -3, we're talking about the distance from -3 to 0. So the absolute value of any number, whether if it's negative or positive, is always going to be positive. It's also always just going to be the number. So, like we said here, the absolute value of -2 is 2. The absolute value of -3 is 3. So an easy way to decide this is to just, for example, if we have -100, we can write 100 because it's literally just the same number. We make sure it's positive, and boom. Do you have any questions about this idea of absolute values? Yeah, actually, that's a really good observation, and I'm glad that you're thinking about things like that in sort of a different way. I really like that. Yeah, so by definition, let's walk ourselves through your question. So a whole number, can a whole number be negative? A whole number. Okay, so whole numbers have to be positive. No worries. So whole numbers are always positive. All of these numbers are positive. Can a whole number be a fraction? No. Are any of these numbers fractions? No, they're not. Now, are any of these numbers integers? Good. Now, not all absolute values are going to be whole numbers. In this case, it worked out because the absolute value, the absolute values of the numbers that we're taking are all whole numbers. But for example, we can have the absolute value of 0.5. And the absolute value of 0.5 is what? It's the distance from 0.5 to 0. So what is the answer? And is 0.5 a whole number? And why not? Right, and whole numbers can't be decimals. So in this case, the absolute value can be a decimal, but it does have to be positive. But we can have the absolute value of a decimal. Does that make sense? Good. Okay, so for example, we can have the absolute value of negative 7.5. And what is this? And why is it 7.5? Exactly. Perfect. We could also have absolute values as a fraction. So the absolute value of 3 over 2 is 3 over 2. It's just whatever number is inside these brackets, make it positive. So for example, negative 4 over 5. What's the absolute value of this fraction? Exactly. Okay, good. So do you have any more questions about absolute value or how to determine the absolute value of a number? Okay, good. So let's just do some practice to make sure we really understand this. Because we started late, is it okay that we end a little bit late? Do you have anything else to do, or can we go a few minutes over? Okay, cool. All right. So what if we have this absolute value and we have this absolute value? Which absolute value is bigger? Right. And why is it negative 5? Right. 5 is bigger than 3. How about the absolute value of negative 10 versus the absolute value of negative 15? Which one is bigger? Okay. And are you familiar with these symbols right here? Greater than or less than? Okay, good. So why is the absolute value of negative 15? Well, first of all, what is the absolute value of negative 15? And what's the absolute value of negative 10? 10 is greater than, or 15 is greater than 10. So we have our answer. Okay. Say we have negative 3.78 and 3.78. Is one greater than or equal to? Or greater than or less than? Or are these equal? Okay. And so what's the absolute value of negative 3.78? And the absolute value of 3.78? Exactly. So they're exactly the same. Good. Okay. So you mentioned that you were also focusing on adding integers together, right? Like adding positive and negative numbers, something like this. Okay, cool. So the idea of adding negative numbers to positive numbers is something that we will go over tomorrow. That's all the time we have for today. Good job today, my man. It looks like you are really nailing this down. Congrats on finishing up your test, and I will see you tomorrow. You too, my man. Bye.